Welcome to the Weekend Booktopian. I'm Mark Harding, Content and Brand Manager for Booktopia, and this is a podcast about the books we're reading. Joining me today are Category Manager for Kids and YA, Sarah McDuling. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
We are also joined by our Category Manager for Non-Fiction, Joel Naoum. Hello, Joel.
Hi, Mark.
And Business Development and Relationship Manager, Scott Whitmont, is also with us. Hello, Scott.
Hi there.
So first up today, some book news. Then we'll delve into the books everyone is reading, and be sure to stick around until the end of the show when my guests will go head-to-head in a battle for book quiz supremacy that we like to call Book Fight. I can tell by some of the looks on people's faces that you forgot about that.
You can't see my face, but I'm not pleased.
It's always a little intimidating with your hairy questions, but we'll do our best.
Every week I try and make them as fair as possible, but
I view the quiz as an opportunity to learn obscure facts about
horror books.
Yeah.
Obscure facts about the books that I like.
You should find a big brass mug as a prize or something, I think. Booktopia big brass mug.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think I would win it because I've won every round I've played, I think, and I still hold the record for the most points scored, which I'm not going to let anyone forget about. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked already.
There's a reason you're in your job.
Yeah. So our first bit of book news today is just a little bit of acknowledgement of a little bit of Booktopia news. The bell was rung on the ASX this afternoon. We're recording this on the 3rd of December, and Booktopia is now officially a publicly listed company.
That is pretty exciting for those of us who work at Booktopia, and for people who love Booktopia who, if they're lucky, might be able to get some shares if there's any left. It's a big deal, especially for our founders who work very hard to get here. So metaphorically opening champagne.
Yeah, it has been a very long journey to get here from our inception on the famous $10 per day budget to where we are now. So yeah, congratulations to everybody, and hooray.
I'm feeling quite emotional about it, actually. As someone who's worked at Booktopia almost long enough to remember the $10 a day, not quite, but it's...
I heard that's what they still pay you.
Isn't that what we all get paid?
That's insider trading, Mark.
Well, you say insider trading. I've actually found, I don't know how many listeners have gone through a process like this, but working for a company that is suddenly being listed on the ASX for the first time, it's been a real education that we've had to have these briefings from lawyers and learn about insider trading, and that, if we're at barbecues, we better be careful about saying this is about to happen, or that's about to happen, or this is going wrong, or this is going great at the company, because it can be considered insider trading. So it's all been quite fascinating, and I've cancelled all my barbecue acceptances. I'm so paranoid now, but it's been a really interesting process to learn what your responsibilities are when you work for a publicly listed company. So that's been a journey too.
It has, and that makes me nervous. So let's move on to
I know, I'm getting very nervous.
Say anything else. The next bit of news that we wanted to discuss is that Mary Trump has announced a new book, which is called The Reckoning, which is about America's national trauma, and it will be released in July of next year. Joel, I'll turn over to you as the non-fiction category manager. What are your thoughts on Mary Trump's new book, The Reckoning?
I mean, the first book has been a huge bestseller, and I think that's partially just because Donald Trump himself came out so strongly against the book and felt personally betrayed by his niece coming out to criticize the family. And I think, from what I've read about Donald, he himself thinks he was very close to his brother, who died in the 80s, fairly young, from alcoholism, who is Mary Trump's father. But the way that she portrays the whole experience is that the rest of the family drove him to the drink and drove him to death, basically. So I'm not sure a second book will have the same kind of impact. It sounds like it's a bit more general. It's about the sort of malaise of our times as a result of Trump, as opposed to, a tell-all about the inside family functionality sort of thing, dysfunctionality. So it'd be interesting to see.
I agree with you, Joel, but I still think it's going to have legs, even if it mightn't be as long a legs as the first book, because I read the first one and it was, really fascinating, and she can write, but people wanted the inside scoop on the family, of course, which this book won't offer. But I think she's developed some literary cred from the first book as a commentator on American society and politics. So I still think those who enjoyed the first, and I'm one of them, will be interested to read the second and her commentary, because I think she's kind of proved herself that she can write and commentate, not just because she happens to be Trump's niece and knows the inside story, but she's an intelligent,
agree.
pretty good writer. So I still think it'll do pretty well. I'm looking forward to seeing what she produces.
I think it remains to be seen what will happen in the world of books about Trump post-election. I'm not sure whether there's still the same appetite as there was, and it will really be, I think it's an open question. That's what happens.
But of course, this book is actually not about Trump as much as about the political landscape and what has led people to support him and change their political colors. So I think it will throw its net a bit wider than just those who want to read about Trump. I don't think the book's going to be just about him. But yes, it'll be very interesting to see.
Cool. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is the best of 2020. It's December now. We're all having a think and a reflect on the books that you read this year, and Waterstones in the UK just announced Hamnet as their book of the year. And I know that Joel and Sarah are both hard at work on their lists of the best books for 2020, which I know you're not ready to release yet, but what are you thinking? Can you give us some hints and teasers as to where you guys are heading?
Hints. I've been finding it, I don't know about you, Joel, but in doing this task of trying to pick, I think the allotment for kids is 10. So it's basically my top 10 of 2020. And not only is it hard to do just because kids encompasses everything from picture books through to YA. So you can only really pick a few things per age range. And also it's hard to balance like the big blockbuster things that it's crazy not to include, because they really shaped like when you look back on the year, they're like huge standout hits, with like the stuff that you just genuinely love. And you have to, so balancing all of that with just 10 choices is agonizing. What have you done to me?
Maybe you should
that's really hard.
Maybe you should do a 5 and 5 or 2 lists of 10, and one of the favorite bestsellers of the year and one of the favorite lesser known books of the year. 2 different lists. That would be interesting.
Well, I think the format is set for our official best of 2020, but I might have to work through some of the frustration of things I couldn't include with some extra blog posts that are just like Sarah's favorites that weren't included. I don't know. It's really hard.
Yeah, I think I have more picks than you, Sarah, because I've got a biographies best of and a non-fiction best of, a more general non-fiction best of. So I've got a lot more picks. It is interesting to try and balance off things that you think that the customers liked, and then things you think you liked that will also have some kind of cult appeal of some kind. I think that's a really interesting experience. And also, like in my area at least, so many of the books that sell really well are like publicity driven. So it doesn't necessarily, people are curious and buy the books out of curiosity. They're not necessarily always the best books. But I do think there are some really big standout books this year in nonfiction that are just beloved. So those ones were easy, but it's once you get outside of the obvious.
I can think of a few that I'm sure that are on your list.
I'm actually prepared to go on record and say what my pick of the best of 2020 is, and it is a non-fiction book, Joel, which is unusual for me.
I can pick my best of 2020 too, but I'm happy to go on the record with my single best favorite book.
Go on.
Do it.
It's Phosphorescence by Julie Mann.
Oh,
yeah, that was the one I was thinking of.
It's both a book I genuinely loved reading, but it's just such a 2020 book. And also our customers love it. So it ticks all the boxes for me. It's such physically a beautiful book as well. And for those who don't know what it's about, it's basically about finding the silver lining in difficult situations, which I can't think of a better year for everyone.
And that's coincidence because it was written before COVID started.
Yeah,
so
in fact,
it's coincidence that it came out at this time.
Total coincidence. So she wrote the book off the back of her own personal tragedies and difficulties around cancer and cancer diagnosis. And some other issues, personal issues. So there's some quite a lot of biographical information in the book as well. But it's primarily around exploring different ways of essentially making yourself feel good in the face of darkness. So that's where the title comes from, the idea of finding a glow in the darkness, which sounds a bit airy-fairy, but it's such a wonderful book. And she was the last in-person podcast that we did at Booktopia before we shut up shop.
Yes, so you can find that podcast on our channel. And exciting news, we're having a Facebook Live event with Julia on the 15th of December. So if you're listening to this prior to that, then tune in on the 15th. And if you're listening to this post that, you can find it on our Facebook and YouTube.
Oh, you win
yes,
either way.
Very well done.
And she's got a new book in the very similar mold to Phosphorescence about grace, I think.
Oh, what's it called?
I think will be. Oh man, you put me on the spot, and I don't.
Sorry. I want to add it to my wish list.
Yeah, it's not actually on site yet, so that's partially why I'm not familiar with it. But it's been announced, and she talked to me about it in the podcast. Actually, she told me what she was working on next, and that was the thing she was working on. I think it'd be fascinating.
Being a book about seeing positive things, a silver lining in darkness, and having just spoken about Trumpism and American politics, it sounds like it could be a big bestseller in the States. I hope it sells well there. It sounds like they could use it.
For sure.
All right, cool. Well, before we move on to the books that we're reading, I did just want to quickly jump in and say my favorite book of the year was a book that I bought last week. And I read it in like one sitting. It's an incredible, amazing book. It's Trixie and Katya's Guide to Modern Womanhood by Trixie Mattel and Katya, very famous drag queens. And the introduction has one of the best lines from any book of the year. It says, reading a book is not a sign of intelligence. You're reading a book and you're a dumb idiot.
That's funny.
Yeah, I loved it.
Well,
I love those two. They're hilarious.
Just so it's not all non-fiction, I might throw in and say my favorite novel of the year is one that I've spoken about on this podcast before. It's An Unusual Boy by Fiona Higgins. Again, I read it in almost one sitting. So many issues in one novel about Australian society and parenting and the police and the health system, and there's so much in there, but it's not overly done. It's easy to read. It's very gripping. It's entertaining and really makes you think. And so to me, that has everything in a novel that I enjoy. So really recommend that one.
Awesome. Sarah, did you want to go on the record with something while we're doing it?
Sure. Can I do a little like one for each broad speaking age range? Because I don't know whether
just in the interest of time, I'm going to make you pick one.
No.
Yes.
All right. If we're going best of the year and most in tune with 2020, I'm going to pick a picture book that is a response to 2020. So this was definitely written after we had landed ourselves in this year, and it is Windows.
Good pick.
Yeah, I guess if I have to pick one, I will pick that one, but it's really hard. It's extremely hard.
That's a great pick, Sarah. That book made me cry multiple times.
I need to have a drink because I should drink every time you mention Windows.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because I'm always
it's like your favorite of the year. I knew exactly where you were going.
Well, it gave me such a it just gave me such a strong reaction. It's not often that fiction books are really emotionally evocative. Generally, you often have an response or something. It's hard not to react emotionally to picture books, but this one made me weep.
And for those who don't know, Sarah, you should tell them that it's about living in lockdown, right?
It is. So it's Windows by Patrick Guest and Jonathan Bentley, and they created this book together. The idea a lot. The idea is just that it's a picture book. It is about COVID, I guess, but it's not overtly about COVID. It's just a really gentle, lovely, sweet story that just goes all around the world, peeking in on, like, sorry, that sounds terrible, peeking through the windows at children, but you know what I mean? Like, it just sort of goes, it goes all around the world, showing children who are just like trapped indoors, separated from their loved ones. And
it shows children looking out of windows all around the world. I
yeah,
think,
but we get to go into their house with all of the kids. You know, it does sound really creepy the way that I chose to. I told you I was tired.
The part of Windows that always gets me is there's a section where, you know, obviously the grandpas coming around to sort of dance around at the window to entertain the grandkid. And that's based on the actual story of the person who wrote
being separated from his son.
Who wasn't allowed being separated from his son because he was a frontline worker, and his son had possible immunity issues, so he wasn't allowed to be around him for this whole lockdown period. And it just like completely gets me right in the feels, that part.
All of the different grandpas as well, the way that they've made this a story for everyone, the way the illustrations work, just showing all of the different like grandparents who are separated from their kids and talking about when everyone will be reunited again. It will just bring a tear to your eye. And I think it's a really lovely way for kids to kind of approach these topics, because it's not too scary. It's just gentle and sweet and focusing on the human side of things.
All right. Well, thank you for that, guys. We'll move on to the books that we're reading at the moment. But before we do, we are sponsored. Now, we're often sponsored by a book, but this week we're sponsored by 4. So I'm sure we're all very well aware of Jennifer Batcher's wonderful novel, Dark Side of the Harbour. We at Booktopia have loved her so much that we, through Booktopia Editions, are going to be putting out not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 more of her books. A Very Public Scandal, Indecent Ambition, Whisper Her Name, and Never Forget Me on December 15th. And guess what? If you buy all 4 of them, you will save 20%. So head over to our website, booktopia.com.au, and check out Jennifer Batcher and A Very Public Scandal, Indecent Ambition, Whisper Her Name, and Never Forget Me. Bundled price from December 15th. Save 20% when you buy all 4.
Mark, I'll just add, I read Dark Side of the Harbour, Sydney, then and now story, historic and contemporary, and I couldn't put it down either. It's a really good story. She's a great storyteller, so I'll be jumping on those 4 myself. She's a great, entertaining novelist.
All right. Now, we've talked about our favourite books of the year. We've talked about our book news. Now it's time to just talk about what we're reading at the moment. Scott, why don't we start with you? What are you reading?
Well, I've just read 2, a fiction and a non-fiction, so I'll have one of each. One, we know the author because he actually is involved with this Booktopian podcast from time to time, Nick Wasiliev's When Men Cry. Nick wrote this as nothing to do with the fact that he does social media with us and does this Booktopian podcast very often. But in his own time, he wrote this very engaging, entertaining novel about young men coming of age in Sydney. 3 friends who go out for drinks. They've been at college together, university together, and one of them clearly has got an issue, a problem that the others are not sure how to handle. And what starts as a fun night out drinking and going to the casino and catching up together when one of them comes back from having been interstate in the armed services, ends up to be a very different sort of journey as the problems of one of them is revealed. And he really looks at men's mental health, issues of mental health that young people face, and not just mental health, but issues generally young people face when they're trying to find their own identity and their path and their career. And it's about mateship, about Aussie mateship and loyalty and friendship and redemption. And tell you the truth, and I've said this to Nick, because I know him, I read it as a favor. I said, okay, I'll read it and tell you what I think. And then I was very pleasantly surprised. I said, this is damn good. I really, really love this book. It's got a lot to think about. It's very engaging, as I said, and not just for men, but for women. It's just anyone in Australia, who's grown up here can relate to a lot of the societal issues he brings up. Leaving home, your first live-in relationship, all those things are there. And even though I'm not a blokey bloke who plays football on the weekend or joins the army like some of these guys, I could still relate to all of those coming of age issues that we all go through. And it would be a great present for Christmas if you're listening to this before Christmas. Just a really, really good read. When Men Cry by Nick Vasiliev. If your bookshop doesn't have it, they can order it. And of course, you can get it on Booktopia. So I wish him well with that. I think he's really done very well with it. And I hope he continues to write, because he's shown some talent that I didn't know he had. And it's really good. The second one is something completely different. It's by Danny Shapiro, an American writer who's written a number of nonfiction books, a number of memoirs. This one's called Inheritance, A Memory of Genealogy, Paternity, and Love. It didn't just come out. It's been out for a little while, but I saw her in an online event being interviewed, so I wanted to read it in advance, and I just read it last week. It's a true story of her, for a lark, like some people do, doing one of those DNA tests. Her husband was doing it. She said, okay, I'll do it too. Never know what you'll find out. She was from an Orthodox Jewish family, brought up a traditional Orthodox Jewish family in New Jersey. And she was her family genealogist, has all the photos of her father's family going back to Poland, and was very proud of that heritage. And then when she got the DNA results, she found out that her half-sister, father had been married before, actually did not share any DNA with her. And so her father, who she adored, who passed away a few years ago, was not her biological father. So what was the story? How was that possible? Both her parents had passed away. And she writes about discovering who her biological father was, trying to see if she can meet him or his family and how they would feel about that. The fact that he wasn't Jewish and she came from this traditional Jewish background, how that affected her feelings of identity, and the whole ethics about DNA testing and what it can reveal when you don't expect it to reveal something, and people are adopted or they were, came from a donation from a donor or something. All the ethics surrounding that, as well as her own journey of identity and acceptance, and how it made her feel about her family and her love for her father who raised her versus the biological father she didn't know. So many issues. It was really, a novel that couldn't be more gripping, but a really interesting memoir about something that didn't exist as an issue until a few years ago, DNA testing, Inheritance by Danny Shapiro.
That sounds super interesting. Thank you so much for that, Scott.
You're welcome.
And I think Nick, who will be editing this podcast, will have a very swollen head right now as well.
Well, look, it's true what I said. I wouldn't have talked about it today if I didn't really enjoy it.
All right, Joel, what have you got to discuss today?
So I've got. I'm going to split it into two. The first one is just very, very simple. It is it's the book Sam Bloom, which is the follow-up to Penguin Bloom, which was released a couple of years ago. It's primarily photographic, and the photographs are beautiful, but basically follows the story of the woman Sam Bloom, who is made quadriplegic and finds it extremely difficult until the family rescues a baby magpie and hand raises it. And so the photos are beautiful. And the reason I'm bringing it up to talk about it is partially because there's a movie trailer that's just come out. Naomi Watts has made a movie of this, and it's total. The trailer will make you cry, and so I'm basically just recommending people watch the movie trailer, to be honest. And then if you don't want to read the book after that, then it's not for you. But like the only people I would say not to watch it or have anything to do with this is people who will get really, really freaked out by the idea of a magpie, a magpie beak really close to someone's eye, because there are lots and lots of photos of this adorable baby magpie named Penguin who goes so close to people's faces that it does sort of freak you out. But yes, that's my first recommendation. Both books are really, really beautiful, so they're definitely worth checking out.
Despite the sad story, they're quite uplifting, aren't they, Joel?
Yeah, they're really, really uplifting.
Yeah.
And I think the film will be a massive tearjerker and very inspirational. So yeah, anyway, they're beautiful books. My second recommendation is actually 2 books, because I haven't had very much time to read, for one. So I've been doing a lot of flicking reading, which I think is something that happens in particular on Christmas Day, at least in my family, where there's always like some fact-based, gimmick-based books that are given as gifts. And then when the conversation runs thin, someone picks it up and flicks to it and goes, asks a question from the book, and people start, talking about it. So I wanted to recommend 2 of those types of books, because they're hard usually to recommend as a book just to read. So the first one is called What It's Like to Be Chased by a Cassowary, which is it's a collection of explainer articles from the Herald and the Age, basically. But it contains all these insane facts and questions and explainers. So it is exactly the kind of thing that you pick up and open up to find one of those weird factoids that people find fascinating around the time of Christmas, when they don't have as much stuff to engage in conversation. Families are not as interesting as you think generally, including the central question from the book is from the title is what it's like to be chased by a cassowary, which is utterly terrifying. Honestly, they're like the closest you get to raptors from Jurassic Park, I think,
Wow.
in the real world. And I recently went to Symbio, the wildlife park down the south coast, with my kids, and I was carrying my son on my shoulders, and the cassowary area looks like a dinosaur cage from Jurassic World, and we were like peering in, and then the cassowary came running out of the bushes at us, and scared the ever-loving crap out of me. So it is really quite fascinating to read about cassowaries. So I highly recommend that. Dr. Carl is the second book I want to recommend in this type of book. This book would be great for kids as well as for adults. And it's the perfect book for this type of Christmas factoid reading. And I saved a great fact from this that's just for Mark. It's in the form of a question. What kind of wingless creature can fly for over 1,000 kilometers non-stop at altitudes higher than 4.5 kilometers?
At altitudes of what?
Higher than 4.5 kilometers.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
You should know, Mark. It's spiders.
Oh.
And it comes from a story that Charles Darwin tells in his book from, a long time ago, about on his ship, there was like a rain of red spiders that were all migrating off their little webby. They float off the web. They let the web go and then they float, but they were all in a huge mass. There were hundreds and hundreds of them, and they all landed on the ship at the same time. And I thought, well, if Mark wants a horror movie concept or a horror book concept, well, I happen to know Mark is not a fan of spiders.
I was going to say.
Now I can't go outside, so thank you for ruining the summer.
It's Huntsman season. I can't have that in my head.
God,
they're really fun. They're really, really fun books. So I just wanted to recommend them because I haven't been deep reading very much at the moment, with work being as crazy as it has been.
He's really consistent, Dr. Carl, isn't he? Every year he brings out something like this with these amazing, weird and wonderful facts.
They're so wonderful to read. And this one has all this extra stuff. He's really into pop-up holograms in the book. So you get the app. Again, it's what makes it a fun book to have open at Christmas around that time of the year when you've got family over and stuff. You get out your app and you can see all the little pop-up things that come out of the book. So it's very interactive.
Great.
Those are good picks.
Yes. Thanks, Joel. All right, Sarah, what about you?
Okay, so I'm going to just first tell you a little bit of a story about how I came to read this book, because being kids and my category manager and moonlighting as a crime fiction reviewer, I tend to really stick in those categories in my reading. And we recently returned to the Booktopia offices after a long time from working at home. And when I got in to the office, I noticed that we'd done a big clean out of all of the proofs that had been building up through the year, and they'd gone onto the shelf in the kitchen where people can browse and read one. And so I can't help myself, even though I'm like got TBRs that are floor to ceiling, I still have to check what's on the proof shelf.
I know the feeling. I did exactly the same thing. I brought home all the books I didn't need.
Yeah, I have to look. And so I looked, and and my eye was caught by the cover of this particular book that I'm about to name, and I picked it up and I read the description. And the book is Uncanny Valley by Laura Weiner. And this is a memoir about a woman who worked in the tech industry in Silicon Valley, like from about, I think it starts at about 2013. So like really for that big, whatever you call the second wave of tech, right? Like, and my brother's really interested in the tech industry. And I was like, I might take this for my brother. But then when I was looking at it when I got home, I saw that it had a pull quote on the cover that said, "This is like Joan Didion at a startup." And I was like, wait a minute, I need to know what that is. And then by coincidence, I didn't start reading it, but then by coincidence, almost like the internet was trying to make me read this book, which after you've read this book, you will understand is a distinct possibility. I saw that the New York Times Best Books of the Year had this book on it. And so that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm like, that's it, I'm reading this book. Sorry, John, my brother, you don't get it. I read it. And then maybe I'll pass it on to him. But I haven't finished it yet. I'm actually in the middle of this book and I'm really hooked. It's been a while since I've read a memoir. And if you would have told me that I would get hooked on a memoir about someone who works in the tech industry, I would have laughed. It's not something that I myself am very interested in. But the reason I think that this book is so compelling to me is that she's a very great writer. I guess it is a little bit like Joan Didion at a startup, but she's an outsider. So, and I think that's why it got me, because if this were a book written by an insider on the inside, like someone who's very much bought into that world and startup culture, then I would have been allergic to it, But she came from a publishing background, and so the whole book is written from the point of view of someone who kind of landed in startup culture almost by accident, and then this slow process of seeing her like where it was really fascinating is she outlines her life before she goes and works in the Silicon Valley, and she was working for a small publishing company. She was living that life that all of us working in the book industry kind of really are familiar with. The culture of publishing is like a really old industry, and there's a lot of like traditions, and it might not particularly at an entry level be hugely well paid, but everyone kind of views that as a rite of passage. And because, it's very different from the tech industry. From the tech industry, everyone in it is young. Like you have all of these like kids in their early 20s who have a cool idea for an app. And then just based on that cool idea and maybe like a slickly designed interface and a few, a good spiel, they get millions of dollars invested in their company that they just came up with. And it's kind of like everyone has this collective suspension of disbelief and just believes in it, and then it's got wheels, and then they reach a certain point in their development when they're like, oh, wait a second, this whole idea that we've got people to buy into isn't working. We have to pivot, and so then they pivot into something else. It's fascinating, and she's on the sidelines of it. And she wants to be taken really seriously by all of these like young 22-year-old CEOs. She herself is about 25, so she's older than these people. But she's kind of seduced into the idea that they need some of her expertise. The first one she goes to work for is to do with ebooks. So she's their person who knows about books. And can you see why I got addicted to this? Like, yeah. It's so interesting. She's a really fascinating writer. She's got a lot of kind of wit and wry humor about it. you can't help but like her, and you can't help but I think that this is, if you're like me and, you know, you don't, the closest I get to knowing about the tech industry is that show. What's that funny show about the group of guys in a tech startup? I've forgotten the name of it.
Silicon Valley.
Oh, it is called Silicon Valley. Yeah. See what I mean? Okay, so that's about the extent of my knowledge. And like, for me, half the fun in this is she never names a single company. So she just describes what the companies do, and you can very easily glean which ones she's talking about. So hearing her talk about Airbnb, Amazon, Facebook, and all this stuff without ever actually saying those words is, I don't know why she chose to do it that way, but I like it because it makes you think more about what the company does, and then how the company started and where they ended up. Anyway, I'm totally into it. I highly recommend it if you're looking for a memoir that's engaging on a topic that, even if you aren't interested, you don't think you're interested in it, this book will make you interested in it. And if you are interested in it, I think obviously it's a no-brainer.
Well, I want to congratulate you on veering off the young adult and children's path for a change.
I mean, I never used to read those books, but then I got a job at a place called Booktopia, and then my reading sort of started getting dictated by my job. It is nice. It is nice to venture outside. When I venture outside, it's reading old favorites and classics. So it's nice to venture outside on a newly published book, although I do think it's early. I think it came out early 2020.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Sarah. Let's get ready, put your jukes up, and get into book fight.
Oh.
I love the energy, guys.
Oh, yeah.
So, as usual, we're going to choose a word that we're going to buzz in with to claim the question. Scott, what word are you going to go with?
Oh, God, I always should think of this ahead of time, and I never do. Well, how about... oh, golly. How about my name? Why don't I say Scott?
Sounds good. Joel, what are you going to jump in with?
Blob. It's what I've become over 8 months of living in my house.
Oh, Joel.
And Sarah?
I'm just going to say Valley from Uncanny. Okay. So I remember it.
Cool. All right, here we go. Question 1. And I'll give, there's 4 points up for grabs here. Name the 4 sisters in Little Women.
Valley.
Sarah.
Jo, Beth, Amy, and Meg.
Ding, ding. Yes, absolutely. All right. Question 2. Booker Prize winner Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart is set in which city and which decade? Scott.
Glasgow in the 80s.
Very good. I'll give you 2 points. Okay, this one should be one that Sarah gets as well.
No, I won't get it. Thanks so much.
All right. A big budget adaptation of which dystopian YA series starring Daisy Ridley and Tom Holland is set to be released in 2021?
Valley.
Sarah.
The Chaos Walking.
Yep, very good. Chaos Walking by Patrick Ness. You're on 5 now, Sarah. Okay. Which literary character holds the Guinness World Record for being portrayed by the most actors on screen?
Oh.
Wonder if we could just guess it.
See, I threw a general one out there, see?
Is it a guessable thing? I'm going to guess. Blob.
Yeah. Go for it, Blob.
Mike.
Sorry.
What?
I'm just laughing I'm laughing at your
You like Blob? Yeah. That's
no.
Okay. I can do a movement too. Blob. My guess is Sherlock Holmes.
You are correct.
Oh,
well
really?
done.
Yeah, over 280 portrayals, according to...
That's way more than I would have thought.
My guess was going to be Dracula, but...
I imagine that Dracula would be a close
I was going to
second.
guess either Robin Hood or Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And I thought...
Well done.
They've been around for a long time.
All right, we're getting slightly more obscure with this next question, but it's not science fiction or horror.
It's learning time.
Or it might not be obscure, actually. Let's see. The 1934 noir detective novel The Thin Man is by which author? And bonus points if you can name the iconic detective character he also created who doesn't appear in The Thin Man.
Blob.
Valley.
Oh, I think I heard Blob first.
The author is Dashiell Hammett.
Very good.
And the character is, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to forget his name. Oh, I love these books too. Oh my God.
I'll give you a clue. A famous book that the character was in was The Maltese Falcon.
Yes, I know.
I'm aware, Mark.
I know that.
I wrote that.
Maltese Falcon is Humphrey Bogart, and he plays Sam Spade.
Very good.
Yep.
There we go.
Yes.
There you go. All right. Next question. This is one for the people who have either read books to children at some point in their lives, because I think everybody's read this book to a kid, or, well, has just read a book to a child. How many different words are used in the classic Dr. Seuss book, Green Eggs and Ham?
Different words.
Yep.
Wow.
I don't know what you mean. Are you saying how many words are there in the book?
Not how many words are there in its entirety, but how many different words are used. He uses a certain number of words to tell the whole story, but it's just a set number of words.
Oh.
Blob. I'll just
Go
guess.
for it. Yeah.
60.
Oh, you're close, but wrong.
Oh, so you have to get it right on.
Okay.
Blob.
So,
59.
50.
very good. It was 50. 50 different
Oh.
words. Yeah, there you go.
I didn't know the answer to that, but I do have a letter that Dr. Seuss wrote to me when I wrote to him when I was a kid, and
Are
I
you
treasure
serious?
it. Yes.
That's
Really?
Yes,
amazing.
I've got
Wow.
it framed with a cat in a hat cover next to it. When he came to Australia, I wrote welcoming him, saying I loved his books, and he wrote me back thanking me. And his signature is just like on the cover of the book, Dr. Seuss.
Oh,
Wow, that's so cool.
that's beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm showing how old I am now, but anyway, it was many years ago.
Okay, we are down to the last question, and I'll do a score check. So we've got Scott on 2, Sarah's in the lead on 5, and Joel is on 4. So Joel, you could tie it here. This is the opening line of a novel question, which is one of my favorites.
Ugh.
I don't like that sound.
No.
Which Mark famously stole from me.
Is the novel one of your favorites, or the question about opening lines?
The
one of your
novel is
favorites?
actually, it is a bit of a Mark novel, so I'll throw that
Oh,
out there
okay.
as well.
Oh,
All right.
okay.
There's
I
a
will
clue.
never get this.
But
Okay,
I
go.
think it's famous outside of me. All right. The sky above the port was the color of television tuned to
Blob.
a dead channel. Joel.
It's Neuromancer.
It is Neuromancer by William Gibson. So,
That's one of my favorite books. I definitely know the first line of that book.
so
The
that
color
means
of television. Interesting.
Yeah, it's such a
So
cool
that
book.
means that you and Sarah are tied for first place. So we're going to go to the tiebreaker question,
Oh.
which is I've just clicked onto the booktopia.com.au homepage. What is the best-selling book on our homepage right now?
Blob.
Promised Land. Oh shit! I forgot to. Sorry, I forgot to.
Is it a Promised Land?
It is Promised Land. So,
By Barack Obama.
I
Well
feel
done.
like Sarah should get that.
All right, Sarah.
No, I'm
Sarah said
happy
it.
for us. I'm
I
happy
stole it.
to stay tied. I broke the rules as well.
No, it's fine. You broke the rules, got it right, and you swore. So I'll give you a point for that. For that
Sarah
combo.
wins.
Yay!
I pride myself on my knowledge of books and how good I am at trivia, and I always fail this quiz. But it's fun.
To be fair, we actually look at it all the time, so I feel like we should know.
All day we're staring at that
And it's
bestseller
a
list.
book in my book in my category too. So I just hope I know.
Well, thank you guys for being good sports, and thank you to everybody who tuned in to listen today. The Weekend Booktopian is produced by Nick Wasiliev. You can find links to the books that we've discussed today in the episode description, or you can just go and find them on booktopia.com.au. You can listen to all of our shows for free right now on SoundCloud and iTunes, including our recent interviews with Bruce Pascoe and Peter Fitzsimons. Until next time, thanks for listening and never stop reading.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.